Hello. I'd like to make this little video to show you some of the work that I've been doing with the SECC data from India and Bodh Gaya. Here in the demo admin page, you can see these three data sets. We have 500 people selected at random from the 35,000-ish cases from Bodh Gaya as a whole, 1,500 people, which constitute the entire village of Mocharim, which is on the river and more centrally located, and about 500 people, which are in the village of Intara, which is not close to a road or the river and is less centrally located. So we expect it to be poorer, and that's exactly what we'll find out. Let's begin with something straightforward and revealing. We're looking at the Bodh Gaya 500 file, which is the file, the sample from the entire area, and let's see how education might affect income. So I'm going to put education on the horizontal axis like this, and we can see that more people are illiterate than are below primary, etc., up to very few who've graduated college or had higher education. And now let's see how this is related to income. In this set, the monthly income attribute is the one we want to use. So I'm going to click on that, and we can see here on the right there are three categories of monthly income, up to 5,000, I presume, rupees per month, between 5 and 10,000, and 10,000 or more. And it's kind of difficult to see what's going on here. There are very few who make 10,000 or more, but there are more among the illiterate. On the other hand, there are more than twice as many in the illiterate class than in any other class. So this is a perfect job for one of my favorite graphs, the stretched bar chart. So that's what we're going to convert to here. And so here we can see that as education increases, the proportion of the dark blue, the 10,000 or more, increases, and the proportion of up to 5,000 decreases, how these bars generally get shorter. This last class, called Other, has actually very few people in it, so we should ignore it. And if I go here to my calculation menu and I ask us to count by category, we can see that there are only 3 in this category. In fact, there are only 8 in the graduate category, so it's a little bit difficult to tell. Whereas 249 are classified as illiterate in this random sample. Nevertheless, in spite of the fact that we have this problem with Other, we can see one of the things that we expect to see, and it's gratifying to be able to document it. So here is exactly the same graph for the village of Mocharim. Now remember, this data set has a total of 1,559 cases, more than 3 times as many. You can see exactly the same pattern, except it's smoother, probably because there are more cases to help us average over, and possibly because a village like Mocharim is going to be more homogeneous than the state as a whole, or than the region as a whole. So here we have 6 in Other, but there are 47 in graduate or higher. And we can really see how the income of these people who've had more education exceeds the income of the people who've had less education. Well, now, this is a development context, and so there are some attributes that are going to be predictors of poverty or of wealth, and other attributes that are in some ways equivalent to poverty or wealth and are indicators of the sort of thing we're interested in. One of them that we have here in this is caste or tribe. If this is a predictor, I should put this on the horizontal axis, which I will do right now, and let's see if there are income differences between the caste groups. Well, here we have SC, which I believe is scheduled caste, and there are lots of people in this category, and even more in Other, and very few in ST, which is scheduled tribe. Nevertheless, we can see the same sort of thing we might have expected. The income for people in the Other category, that is to say not in a scheduled caste, is substantially higher than that of the people who are in the caste. Let's take a look at education as a function of this caste and tribe. So we're going to change education from being a predictor to being an outcome, an indicator. We might have a model in our head that says, oh, people who are not in the castes have more access to higher education. And in fact, that does appear to be what we see. Look at the illiterate proportions in these three groups, especially these first two, and see how you get larger proportions of the more educated groups in the other than in the caste, and larger proportions in the less educated groups, illiterate, below primary and primary school, in the caste and tribe, as opposed to in the other group. So one model we might imagine is that your caste helps enable or inhibit your education, and the education in turn inhibits or enables your income. This doesn't prove that, but if I were an administrator in Mocharim, this is something interesting to see. In contrast, let's look at the marital status of these different groups. We can see there is some gray here. That's going to appear because some of the people do not have a marital status listed. But you can see that going across these three groups, although there are differences, the differences are much smaller. That is to say, the marital practices of the people who are in a scheduled caste are not, at least measured by these statistics, any different from the marital practices of those who are not. Let's look at a different response variable, a different output variable. I'm going to use this very interesting attribute, walls, which is the principal material that the walls of their homes are made of. And we can see here that the more advantaged group, the non-caste group, tends to have fired brick walls, whereas the caste group has almost the same proportions, but reversed, of unfired brick walls, that's to say mud walls in their homes. Let's look at roofing materials. And so we're going to watch as this graph constructs itself. Half of the homes of this more advantaged group, the other group, have concrete roofs, whereas roughly half, a little more than half, of the caste and tribe group has roofs that are grass or bamboo or some other thatch material. Both have some handmade tiles and both have some other. There are many other possible roofing materials. Now let's look at the overall source of income. You might think that would be an occupation, but that's not a good attribute to use here because there are so many classes. Income source is more limited. So here we see there are only 7 different categories, and we can also see that only a couple of them are salient. The people in the other group, nearly half of them are involved in cultivation. They're farmers. This large pink area is manual labor. So almost all of the people who are in the caste or tribe are in manual labor, and they are not farmers. The farmers are in this other group. Now, we have to ask ourselves right now, are the farmers actually doing better than people who are manual laborers? Are they earning more money? The way to look at that is to take this variable income source, and I'm going to put it on the horizontal axis. So now I'm going to select monthly income, and we'll be able to see. Remember that most of these columns that we're seeing here are not very salient. They're very small numbers. Only one person in this entire sample is actually a beggar and relies on alms. But 483, roughly 1/3 of the people in the sample, rely on cultivation. Remember also that 10,000 or more is the lots of money, and the light green is not very much money. So this column is about cultivation, and this column is about manual labor. Once again, we see cultivation people make more than the manual labor people. But it's worth noting some of these other smaller populated columns. There are only 34 people who have their own enterprise, but more than half of them are making 10,000 or more. There are only 43 who are domestics, but nearly half of them make 10,000 or more. And in both of these categories, very few of them are sort of at the low end of the scale, making 5,000 rupees a month or less. So this also tells us something interesting about the employment picture here in Mocharim. You've now seen most of the things that I wanted to show you at this point, but let's take a moment to look at the village of Intara, the one that's farther from the river and farther from the road. This graph shows how monthly income depends on your caste status. Again, we can see, as we saw in the other village in Mocharim, that the people who are in the scheduled caste are not as well off as those who are not, those in the other category. In this case, nearly all of the ones who are in the scheduled caste are making 5,000 rupees or less, and none are making 10,000 or more, whereas the distribution is a little better over here in other. There are some of these dark blue, 10,000 or more, 28.5% in the middle, 5 to 10,000, and still over half, but a much smaller proportion in the group that's making 5,000 or less. Really quickly, I'm now going to change to the exact same graph over in Mocharim so we can compare. Remember, scheduled caste, 93% is in the poor group. Okay, here we have 89%, which is not all that different. There are a few people, but there are also lots more in the sample, 558. But look at the other group. Here, only 32% are in the 5,000 or less, and fully half of them are in 5 to 10,000. There's 17% more. Let's go look at Intara again, and we can see that the scheduled caste is kind of comparable between the two groups. It's the other people who are doing better in what might be the more cosmopolitan village of Mocharim. Once again, this is Mocharim, and this is Intara. It would be interesting to put these two charts in the same data set, and that might be something you'll want me to do in the future or that we'll be able to arrange.